Alright, so the things you're going to need today to make your pinch pot are your tools. So you'll need your knife, you're going to need your fork, your spoon. I have a plastic spoon. You're going to need some water. I just took a plastic cup and cut it in half because I don't want a whole lot of water. You only need a little bit. If you have a whole cup here and you're working in your room or something and you knock it over, you're going to make a big mess. This, if you knock that over, it's not going to make as big of a mess. You're going to also need your sponge and your rib. I also have a piece of string here to cut my clay because that is also what you need, is your clay. To cut the clay, I'm going to use this piece of string. If you have string, you can use, this is just a piece of twine. You can use some kite string. You can use fishing line. You can see how that makes a really nice clean cut there, because I don't need very much of this clay. To start off with, you're going to make 2 balls of clay that are about the size of a baseball. So I'm just taking a few pieces here. I'm just going to ball it up. Just kind of squeezing it, smacking it around a little bit. It doesn't have to be a perfect ball. Okay, so there's one. Now you want your other one to be the same exact size, so you want to make these first before you start pinching your clay. So now I've got 2 balls that are the same size, about the size of a baseball. And now I'm going to pinch these into 2 pinch pots. So to make a pinch pot, you're going to dig your thumbs in the center, go down a couple inches, and I'm going to squeeze and rotate. So the goal here is to get this the same thickness all the way through. You want the whole thing to be about an inch, a little less than an inch thick. So I'm just spinning it and pinching it. Alright, so there's one. Now I'm going to make another one. So I'm going to dig my thumbs in a couple inches, and then I'm going to rotate it and pinch it. One thing I don't want you to do is don't put it on your surface and do it, because then the bottom of your pinch pot's going to be flat. You want this to be rounded, because when you put these 2 together, it should make a sphere. The technique I'm using, my hand is like this. Like, you kind of have to imagine if you're doing a puppet and your hand's in a puppet and pinch like this. Because what I'm doing is I kind of want the clay to pinch and kind of pull out this way. You don't want this to get really wide and flat. If it does, then you're going to have to start over. Okay, so now I've got 2 pinch pots that are about the same size. And now what I'm going to do is score and slip these together. So to do that, I'm going to take my fork, I'm going to scratch it pretty good. And I'm going to scratch this side. Remember, whenever you're connecting 2 pieces of clay together, you want to score and slip. You're scoring and slipping the 2 pieces of clay that are connecting to each other. Alright, now I'm going to take my water, and you can use your hand to kind of put a little bit of water here. You can use your sponge. Just kind of dab the water on there. Don't put too much. See, water kind of pooled up in there, so I'm going to dump the extra water out. Put water here. And then figure out which way they fit together best. So this one kind of sticks out on this side, and it kind of caves in on this side, so I'm going to put it like this so they kind of fit together evenly. Kind of push them together so they get stuck. And now I'm going to take my spoon and blend these 2 pots together so that it becomes one piece. Don't worry about mushing it up and making it look messy, because I'm going to show you how to fix all that later. Right now all you're concerned with is blending these together enough to where that they hold together and they don't fall apart. Alright, so I've gone all the way around. Now it's one piece. But now I want to smooth this out because it's really rough right here. And some of you might find that once you put these together, your your ball kind of looks like a peanut shape where it's wide on top and then skinny in the middle where you connected them, and then wider on the bottom, so you have it kind of caved in right here. Any areas that are caved in, I'm going to show you how to fix that next. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take my rib to smooth this out and get it as smooth as I can before I move on to the next step. So when you take this rib or this card, you're going to want to arch it like this. So I'm pushing my thumb in the middle to arch it, and by arching it, it covers more surface area rather than if it were flat, it's only going to touch a small portion, but if it's curved, then it's covering up more area. So what I'm going to do is I'm curving it, and I'm not really removing too much clay. I'm more redistributing the clay from the high points to the low points, and I'm just going to work my way around the whole thing. I'm just kind of rotating it randomly all over to try and get this smoothed out as best as I can before I move to the next step. If you get a lot of buildup on the clay here, you can just take that off, set it aside. You can use that later. So it's starting to take shape now. It's starting to kind of look like it was always one piece, you know. It didn't look like this started off as two separate pieces that I connected together. So now I can just kind of run my fingers over it to smooth out the rest. Okay, so I have now I have a larger ball, and now what I need to do, the next thing is to make the top. Okay, so you need to determine which is the top and which is the bottom. Right now mine's pretty round. If yours may be a little more elongated, and if the shape of your pot is not round, you can kind of roll it in your hands to make it taller. So it's more of a oval shape rather than a ball. So see, now it's a little taller. And now what I'm going to do is determine which is the top. And this doesn't really matter too much. And you notice I have this caved in part here. I'm going to show you how to fix that after we cut a hole. So what I'm going to do now is cut a hole for the opening of my pot, which will then lead into the neck of my pot. So I'm going to cut a hole about the size of a quarter. Don't make this too big. You want this to be pretty small. You can always make it bigger later, but if you cut too much out, it's going to be hard to put it back in. So just a small hole. Also, if you cut this way too big and then you add a neck, your pot's just going to go straight up. And the pots that you guys are making, they're going to be more curved in and then up for the neck. So there's the hole. And now that it's open, now I can go inside and push out these caved in parts. So see, I have a caved in part here. So I'm going to go and push that out. And it's separated a little bit, but that's okay, because now I'm going to take my rib and smooth it. So remember, the rib gives shape to the outside of your pots. So I'm pushing that out and then ribbing it. So the goal is to get this as smooth as you possibly can and symmetrical all the way around before you add the neck. Because once you start adding a neck on here, it's going to be harder to put your hand inside to push out any of these caved in spots. So you want to get this as smooth and symmetrical, meaning that the curve on this side matches the curve on this side, but then also matches the curve on this side and this side all the way around. So when you rotate it, it should have the same curvature all the way around. So for this next part where I'm ribbing it, the easiest way to do that is to put it down on your table and then start with your rib and pushing on the inside to push out these caved in parts while I'm ribbing it from the bottom all the way to the top. And I'm rotating it, and I'm going to do this all the way around my whole pot. And you'll notice that it'll really start to smoothen out once you do this step. I'm just going all the way around. My rib is arched. You can see I'm not removing very much clay. I'm more redistributing that clay from the high points to the low points. And it's okay, while I'm doing this, the bottom's kind of flattening out, and that's okay because it's the bottom of your pot anyway, so it'll stand on its own now. Okay, so now that I've done that, it's starting to get smoother. I still have a little bit of caved in areas here, so I'm going to work on that some more. So I'm going to push it out and rib it. Make sure you're looking at the profile of your pot while you're doing this to get it really smooth and symmetrical. Alright, so it's really starting to take shape now. Getting smoother. Now once you've pushed out all those caved in areas, you've ribbed the whole thing, the final step to getting it really smooth is to take your sponge. It doesn't have to be soaking wet, but take your sponge and just really scrub the outside of your pot. This is going to get it really smooth. And I'm doing it holding it so you guys can see. Might be easier for you to do it while it's on your table. Okay, so now, and you're gonna sponge it again later because now every time I pick it up I'm creating these little tiny marks on it. With this, see I have this little part here that, I don't know, I must have hit it with my hand or something. Just scrub that out with a sponge. See, it's gone. Okay, next step is to make the neck. So I'm going to take a little bit more clay, don't need a lot, and I'm going to make a coil. And to make a coil, first thing you're going to do is roll it in your hands. Like this. It's easiest to start the coil in your hand before you start rolling it on your table. Easiest way to roll out a coil is to use one hand, regardless of how big of a coil you're making. When we get to the coil pot project, you're going to be rolling out really long coils, but you're still going to want to use one hand and use the whole length of your hand from your fingertip all the way, move this out of the way, all the way to your palm, and go back and forth. Start on one side of the coil and then work your way to the other side. And as you're working your way back and forth, if you notice maybe the center is getting a little skinnier than these sides, what I'll do is I'll skip that part and go to the end. Because the goal is to get this uniform all the way through, the same thickness all the way through. Now, with regards to how thick you want your coil to be, for this project, for your neck of your pinch pot, you want it to be a little bit thicker, or rather a little thinner than like a marker, like a Crayola marker, or a Sharpie. Maybe the size of a Sharpie would be good. Okay, so there's my coil. And now I'm going to need to score and slip this on. Remember, you're scoring and slipping, because if you don't score and slip, everything's going to fall apart. So I've scratched it here, and I've scratched more than I need to. That's okay, I can smooth that out later. I'm going to scratch the coil. I'm going to add water. I'll just use my fingers. A little water here, a little water here, and then be sure you're connecting the two scored parts together. Now this is way more longer of a coil than I actually need, so what I'll do is I'll cut the extra off with my knife. Mush those together. You don't have to score and slip this little piece in between. And now I'm going to take my spoon and I'm going to blend the neck down into the body. And again, I don't recommend you keep picking this up. I'm picking it up so you can see what I'm doing, but you can leave yours on the table. Make sure that this coil is perfectly centered over the top. And then you're going to blend just a small amount of this coil into the body of your pot. Don't mush half of this coil into there. You got to keep in mind, the more of this coil you mush into the body of your pot, the thinner your neck's going to be. And if the neck is really thin, it's going to be flimsy. And you're going to need to add one or two more coils to this. So I'm working my way around. Again, don't worry about it looking too neat, because you're going to smooth this out with your rib and a sponge later on. Right now you're just concerned with making sure that it stays, it doesn't come off. So there's one. Try and get that as round as I can. Now I'm going to make another one. I'm just going to take some of this leftover clay here, roll it together. I rolled it in my hand first, now I'm rolling it on the table. One hand, back and forth. Try and get it as thick as your previous coil. This time I'm gonna measure it first and then I'll score and slip it. I cut it there to get like a nice clean edge that'll connect this side too. Okay, so now you can even kind of, now that I know exactly what size it needs to be, I'm gonna blend this together now. Score and slip. Add water. Get it perfectly centered. My pot was leaning a little bit, so I put it up straight and then kind of tapped it down. You notice now it's perfectly straight. This time I'm going to leave it down here and I'm going to just work my way around. I'm just using the end of the spoon and just blending a little bit of this top coil into the coil below it. And now I'm going to rib it. So I'm only going to add 2 coils. You will determine whether you need, you know, 1, 2, or 3 coils, and that'll be based on how tall your pot is, because remember the requirement of this assignment is that your pinch pot be is 6 to 8 inches tall. So measure it, and if the body of your pot ended up being really short, you're going to need to add more coils to reach that height requirement. Mine's tall enough, so now I'm going to rib it. So I'm going to start from the, even though I already did all this, I'm going to do it again because I want to start from the bottom and work my way up. If I start here and then I'm going to create a little indent. If I start at the bottom, it's okay if I create an indent at the bottom, but I don't want there to be an indent in the middle of my pot. You might want to support your neck as you're ribbing this because it's really thin, so it's kind of flimsy. You don't want to, I'm not doing this hard enough to where I don't want to indent the neck or anything. I'm just trying to get all this to look like one piece. Get it really smooth. Okay, so now it's getting there. Now what I need to do is use my sponge to get rid of all these vertical lines I created with the rib. So get your sponge wet. Doesn't have to be soaking wet. You don't want the outside of your pot to be super wet. But now I'm just going to rub this around the neck, on the body again, and any areas there where you have like a little mess up or an indent, just scrub it with the sponge until that thing goes away. Like, see, I just made an indent with the side of my sponge here, but if I just keep just doing in like circular motions, I just basically like erased it. I'm gonna bend this to try and get in between. Let me do it this way. In between this crevice here. Just trying to get it as smooth as I can. So you can see now it's starting to take a little bit more shape. It's starting to look a little nicer. You see all these little indents here. Just scrub them away. Okay, now you'll notice the top of my pot is not very level, so I want that to be pretty level. So I'm going to cut that. Determine which side's a little higher than the other and kind of try and cut that down. Now I'll go back over there with the rib to get a nice clean edge on there. You want to try and make the top of your pot, the thickness here of the rim, the same all the way around. I'll just use my finger. See, I can wet my finger. Kind of hard to get the sponge in here, so just use my wet finger to smooth that all out. Alright, so that's the main part of your pot, and the last thing you need to add is the foot. But before you do that, because you're gonna have to flip this upside down, you're gonna want your neck to firm up a little bit. If I did it right now, it would kind of smush because it's so soft. So I'm gonna let this firm up, and then I'll do the foot. If you want to speed up the drying process, grab a hair dryer. Make sure it's on hot.
A few moments later.
Alright, so now that this is firmed up a little bit, I'm going to flip it. I'm still going to be careful. I'm just going to gently put it on the neck. And now I'm going to make another coil for the bottom, for the foot. Roll this out with my hand, and then roll it on the table. Don't make this too thin, because you don't want it to smush. This one can be a little bit thicker than your neck was. You also don't want this to be too wide. Like if you put it way out here, then you're going to lose some of the shape of your pot. You don't want the bottom of your pot to just come straight out. You want it to kind of, the bottom to curve in and then come up for the foot. So I made mine really small, but that's okay. And then score and slip this. Get it right in the middle and blend that in. Don't blend too much of that coil in. And then I'll rib it. Start from the bottom, work my way up. Now I'm creating a little bit of an indent down here where I'm starting the rib on the neck, but that's okay. I'll go back and smooth that out later. Even though we already ran a rib over it a couple times, we sponged it a few times, you're going to need to sponge it at least one more time and maybe even rib it one more time once we flip it over. All these things are just to get it smooth. Okay, I'm going to take my sponge now. Okay, I'm going to flip it over. I don't think my neck was still a little soft, so as you see, there was moisture on my table, created this kind of a speckled edge here, but again, sponge will smooth that right out. And then here's where I was using the rib, create all these indents. So now I'm going to rib it again from the bottom all the way to the top. The final ribs to get it really smooth. After I do this, I'll sponge it one last time. Make sure there's no little indents or scratches or areas that are messed up. And then we'll be just about ready to carve our design. Like my sponge is getting a lot of clay in it, so I want to get a lot of that out before I sponge it anymore, and then squeeze a lot of that moisture out too. Alright, so there it is. Pretty smooth. I'm going to do the final smoothings with my fingers. You get a little bit of moisture on your hand, that'll smooth it out too. Okay, so there's my pinch pot. Now before I start carving into this, I need to get it leather hard. There's two things you could do to get this leather hard. The first thing is, if you're not in a super hurry, what you could do is and if it's a sunny day, you can go set this outside in the sun. Leave it out there for about 10 minutes and keep checking on it. You don't want it to get too dry. If it gets too dry, then it's not going to be hard to carve into. But if I were to try and carve into this now, so I just have a pencil here I'm going to use to carve into this. If I try to carve into this now, you see how I'm getting all this buildup here, which would be more work because then you're going to have to go back in and clean all this out. If I wait for this to get leather hard, you won't get any of that buildup. You're gonna get a nice clean carving, and you can erase that with the sponge. So again, you can put it outside in the sun for about 10-15 minutes. Keep checking on it, make sure it doesn't get too dry. If you notice the sun's really only hitting one side, go out there and rotate it, or you can use a hair dryer to speed up the process. Alright, now the way to determine if your pot has gotten leather hard is it's not as cold as it was, because there's not as much moisture in it anymore, because as it dries, the moisture comes out of the clay, and it just feels a little firmer. And the real clear indication is once you start carving, if you're not getting too much of that buildup.
A few moments later.
Alright, so I put it outside for a while. Now it's leather hard, and when I carve into it, you can see I get a cleaner line without all that buildup. And if it does build up, now that it's a little harder, it'll flake off pretty easily. So at this point, now you're going to go ahead and carve your design, whatever it is you decided to carve, into your pot. You can use various objects to imprint. If your pot has, part of your design has circles, then I recommend finding something circular to imprint into your clay so that all your circles are the same size, if that's what you intend. If you're doing a line that goes across around your pot, you want it to be level. You don't want your line to be kind of crooked. So I would use a ruler and measure the distance. Let's say you want this to be right in the center. So if I measure from here to here and it's 3.5 inches, mark it 3.5, 3.5, 3.5, and then create your line along your mark so that your lines go perfectly straight across. And that's it. Now when you're done, any leftover clay that you have laying around, you're going to want to save all this, just kind of ball it up and put it back in your bag and close your bag up. Now whenever you finish working with your clay for the day, you're going to want to make sure that you cover it up in a bag so it doesn't dry out. Even after you've gotten it leather hard, you're going to want to cover it up so it doesn't get drier. If it gets too dry, you're going to have to start over. So just make sure. I just kind of completely wrapped it, twisted it over onto itself, and it should be good to go until you're ready to work on it again.